The Galactic Council chamber on Station Kepler 7 was full of noise. There were 100 different kinds of creatures in the huge room, and they were all talking in their own languages. The sounds of clicks, whistles, hums, and words made a symphony that somehow turned into organized chaos. The air itself seemed to be vibrating with importance. Commander Rebecca Hayes sat quietly in the human delegation section. Her back was straight but not stiff, and her hands were calmly folded in her lap. 3 months ago she was chosen for this job, and everyone on Earth told her the same thing: expect resistance. The galaxy wasn't ready to treat humans like everyone else. Not yet. Maybe never. But as she sat here watching the council members fight over trade routes and land disputes, Rebecca felt surprisingly calm. She had dealt with worse than aliens who were doubtful. In August, she had survived officer training in the Mojave Desert. She had taken survival classes in the Arctic and the Amazon. She wasn't scared by a room full of people who didn't believe her. But she didn't expect it to be so dramatic. The chamber was a great example of engineering. The walls were clear so you could see the stars outside. This made everyone feel like they were really in space. The seats were arranged in a spiral pattern, with each section made for a different type of animal with different needs. Some people sat in chairs. Some were in tanks of liquid and floated. A few were hanging from the ceiling. The whole thing screamed, "We're all equal here," but Rebecca quickly learned that some species were definitely more equal than others. For example, the Zenthari. She had read about them in the materials for the briefing. A proud kind. Very old. Strong. For thousands of years before humans learned how to make fire, they had been exploring the galaxy. They ruled over 17 star systems and were known for being smart negotiators and even smarter warriors. But reading about them and seeing one in real life were two very different things. Ambassador Velcross stood up like a mountain of living crystal. When light hit his body, it broke into 1,000 rainbow pieces that danced on the walls of the room. He was huge, at least 9 feet tall and maybe even taller. His whole body looked like it had been carved from diamond, but it moved with a grace that no stone could ever match. He was covered in facets that bounced and reflected light in a way that made it almost painful to look at him. Rebecca learned that the Zenthari came from a planet called Kethvar, which is cold and has ice caves and crystal formations on it. There, predators didn't chase their prey. They stayed put. They went into hiding. They blended in with the sparkling surroundings until an unlucky animal got too close, and then they struck with lightning speed. They had been hunting like that for millions of years, which had turned them into living weapons that were both beautiful and scary. Velcross didn't just stand there. He was in charge of the room. People stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. All of the eyes, stalks, sensors, and antennas turned to look at him. The translation devices even seemed to stop for a moment before catching up. "The human petition is stupid," Velcross said, and his voice was sharp, clear, and impossible to ignore, like music made from breaking glass. The translator in Rebecca's ear made his words sound like perfect English, but she could still hear how angry he was without the translation. He pointed to the main display, where Earth's petition was still visible. It was a formal request to move human colonies into what the Council called Deathworld territories. These planets were like Earth in that they had high gravity, extreme weather, and dangerous animals. Most civilized species wouldn't go near them with a 10-foot pole. "They want to move into Deathworld areas?" Velcross went on, slowly turning his faceted head to look at different council members to make sure everyone understood what he was saying. These soft beings who accidentally came out of their rough nursery world? Who accidentally found a way to travel faster than light and joined our council by chance instead of merit. Rebecca could feel the stairs moving toward her section. She didn't say anything. "Not yet." "Deathworlders are not survivors, council members," Velcross said, his voice rising with passion. "They're just lucky prey. Animals that should have died out but didn't for some reason. They don't have any natural armor, venom, or claws that are worth talking about. Without basic clothing they can't even keep their body temperature in check." He turned to face Rebecca directly, and the light caught his many-colored eyes and bounced off of them like tiny spotlights. "Any real predator could easily take them over. We are not equal to them. At most they are interesting. At worst, a burden that we will have to protect as soon as they leave their little blue marble." The silence that came after was complete. Rebecca could hear her heart beating in her ears. Species that had been talking just a few moments ago were now frozen around the chamber. Rebecca saw that the Torgathy delegate, a bird-like creature with bright purple feathers, had flattened those feathers against his body. This was a sign of fear. The Whisper Clan representative, which looked like a slug with eye stalks, had pulled those stalks back so that they were almost invisible. The people around Rebecca, even the ones who were there to help her, had stopped moving. Tom Parker, her assistant, was holding on to the armrest of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Janet Brooks, an older woman who worked as a diplomatic advisor, had her eyes closed as if she were praying that this would all go away. But what about Rebecca? Rebecca stayed still. She didn't move. She didn't look away from Velcross's bright eyes. She sat there perfectly calm and still. And then, slowly and on purpose, she let a smile spread across her face. A smile that isn't nervous. Not a fake smile from a diplomat. A real one. The kind of smile that comes from knowing something the other person doesn't. Velcross looked more upset by that small smile than by any angry outburst. His facets changed, making the light hit them in different ways. Rebecca would have thought he looked confused if she didn't know better. Predators shouldn't have smiled at prey. The prey was supposed to run. But Rebecca Hayes wasn't going anywhere. She was just getting started though. Rebecca stood up after letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. She moved slowly and carefully as if she had all the time in the world. Everyone in the room watched her move. The section for people was near the back, so she had to walk down a few steps to get to the main floor. Her boots made a soft clicking sound as they hit the polished stone floor, and each step echoed in the quiet. "Ambassador Velcross," she said, and her voice carried across the room without her having to shout. "I appreciate this chance." The facets on Velcross's face moved around, making it look like he was confused. For a moment, the translator had a hard time figuring out what his face meant. "Opportunity?" he said again, this time with a lot of doubt. Rebecca walked closer and stopped about 10 feet away from the tall alien. She stood in a relaxed parade rest with her hands behind her back, a position that any soldier would recognize. "To show what a Deathworlder can do," she said simply. "You've made a claim, Ambassador. A very clear claim. You said that any real predator could easily take over humans. I'd like to see if that claim is true." It was so quiet in the chamber that Rebecca could hear the humming of the environmental systems in the walls. She moved forward once more. "Pick any kind of one-on-one fight you want. Any hunting situation. Any test of survival. You choose the rules, the setting, and the circumstances. You be the hunter. You seem to think it's easy to catch me, so I'll be the prey." Nothing happened for about 3 seconds. Then the room filled with noise. It was like someone had kicked an anthill over. The Torgathy delegate started to scream in fear, and his translator had a hard time keeping up with the fast bursts. The Whisper Clan representative made a noise like steam escaping. In the back, a species that communicated through bioluminescence was flashing so quickly that it looked like a strobe light. The clicking, chittering, whistling, and warbling all came together to make a wall of sound that was both organized and chaotic. Velcross just looked at her. After that, he started to laugh. The sound was like a hammer hitting a crystal xylophone. It was both musical and harsh at the same time. It got louder and louder until it filled the whole room, drowning out even the other delegates' confused chatter. "You challenge me?" he said when he finally stopped laughing, but his voice still sounded amused. "You? A person? What does a Zenthari warrior do?" He opened his arms wide, and light spread out from his body in all directions. "Very good, little prey. Since you want to show how inferior you are so badly, I'll let you." He started to pace, moving smoothly and like a predator. Rebecca saw that he didn't walk. He glided, with each step perfectly balanced and quiet, even though he was very big. Velcross said, "A persistence hunt. 72 hours in a hostile environment simulator. The rules are easy to follow. I go hunting. You run. The first one to hurt the other wins. We can't use any weapons except what we can find in the environment. No help from outside. Just predator and prey like nature intended." His clear chest swelled with confidence, catching the light and sending it back in bright flashes. "When you fall, and you will fall, humanity will stop asking for more space. Also, your species will agree to be a protected species under the watchful eye of Zenthari. We will help you like adults help kids until you are ready to be on your own. Which might never happen." The human delegation section went crazy with protests. Tom Parker jumped up, his face red. Janet Brooks was frantically tapping on her data pad, probably looking for a rule that would stop this. The other 3 human delegates were talking over each other, and their voices made a mess of sounds. But Rebecca just nodded, as calm as a still lake. "And when I win," she said, "not if but when," and the confidence in her voice cut through the noise like a knife. "The Zenthari will publicly acknowledge humans as equals. You take back all of your objections to our plans to grow. And you formally apologize to this council for wasting their time with insults that weren't true. When do you win?" Velcross's laughter came back, and this time it was even louder. A few delegates even flinched when they heard it. "Oh, this is funny. This is just great. Yes, that's fine. When you somehow beat a predator whose species has been perfecting the art of the hunt for 10 million years, I will personally beg this council to declare humans the better species. Are you happy?" "Agreed," Rebecca said without any further explanation. The council arbiter stepped in at that point. The arbiter was a Mythian, which looked like a big blob of clear gelatin with different organs floating around inside it. They were one of the oldest species in the galaxy and were known for being wise, patient, and completely neutral. The arbiter had been settling council disputes for longer than people had been around. One gelatinous appendage stuck out from the arbiter's main body mass, and the gesture somehow made everyone pay attention. The whole room went quiet right away. "The terms are set," the arbiter said. Their voice was a deep rumble, and the translators made sure that everyone could hear it in their own language at the same time. "A hunt for persistence. 72 hours. Win by making the other person unable to fight. The stakes are what they say they are. Before we move on, we need to set the parameters for the environment." The arbiter's many eyes, which looked like bubbles in their clear body, were all on Rebecca. "Commander Hayes, since you are the one being challenged, you have the right to set the conditions of the environment. What do you want?" Rebecca acted like she was thinking about it for a second, but she already knew what she was going to say. "I have one thing to ask," she said slowly. "The environment should be like a moderate death world. Nothing too crazy. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just normal for worlds like mine. Normal Earth-like settings." A lot of delegates gasped. Tom Parker made a noise in the back of his throat that sounded like he was choking. Janet Brooks even stopped typing and just stared. Velcross's features sparkled with pure joy. "Do you want to fight in a world like yours? The world you say almost killed your kind several times? Oh, this is just too good. You're going to lose in the very place you thought you could adapt to." He looked at the arbiter. "Okay. Make the simulator's settings match those of Earth. Moderate zones, whatever that means for a death world." The arbiter's arm waved again to confirm the terms. "The challenge will start in 6 hours. Both people will have time to get ready. The council will watch from afar. The simulator will be set up so that no one gets hurt for good, but both sides should know that pain, temporary incapacity, and exhaustion are likely to happen. Do both sides understand and agree to these terms?" "Understood and accepted," Velcross said right away. "Understood and accepted," Rebecca said again. "This session is over until the challenge starts," the arbiter said. "Get ready, participants." As the room started to empty and delegates started to talk excitedly in groups, Tom Parker almost ran down the steps to get to Rebecca. His face was pale and his hands were shaking a little. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, are you sure about this? The Zenthari evolved into the best ambush predators. Velcross has won 3 territorial challenges on his own. He has killed things that are twice as big as him. And will be in a place that looks like Earth, so he'll have all the advantages of a prepared hunter in a place where you—" He stopped talking because Rebecca was smiling again. That same calm, knowing smile. "Tom," she said quietly, putting a hand on his shoulder, "I know exactly what they are. I read the same briefings as you did. I know that Velcross is a well-known warrior. I know that the Zenthari have been the top predators on their world for millions of years. I already know all of that." "Then why?" Rebecca gently cut in. "The question isn't whether I know what they are. The question is if they know who we are." She turned to look at Velcross, who was already celebrating his sure victory with his own group of people. They developed on a cold, dry planet where they could hide in crystal formations and attack from behind. Tom, they're experts, perfectly suited to their surroundings. They're dominant. But we didn't evolve to rule over our surroundings. We changed to stay alive. And those two things are very different. A huge difference. He's going to learn the hard way. The simulator came to life around them in stages like watching a painting come to life in real time. The first thing you noticed was the ground, which was dark and full of dead plants that smelled like dirt. Then the plants grew up, and ferns and other plants spread across the forest floor in thick green carpets. Finally, the trees grew. Their trunks were so big that it seemed like it took them forever to reach their full height. Their canopies spread out above them, blocking out most of the fake sky. Rebecca stood in a jungle that looked like it had come straight from the Amazon basin when it was over. The air was thick and heavy with moisture and it felt like a wall. It wasn't just humid, it was the kind of wet heat that made you feel like you were drinking water with every breath. The display on her wrist said that the temperature was 40 degrees Celsius and the humidity was 95%. She could already feel sweat forming on her skin, which is how her body cools itself down naturally. The trees around her were huge, with trunks so wide that 5 people holding hands couldn't go around them. Their tops were lost in the thick canopy above, and they seemed to go up for hundreds of feet. There were vines hanging down in loops that were as thick as her arm. Huge leaves, some as big as dinner tables, made shadows that made the jungle floor look like a maze of light and dark. And the noises. Oh, the noises. There was a constant symphony of buzzing and chirping insects. There was a sound that sounded like a bird but probably wasn't coming from somewhere in the canopy. She could hear what might have been a predator roaring in the distance. The sound bounced off the trees. The whole jungle felt like it was alive, breathing, and watching. Above the simulator, 24 different species from the Galactic Council had gathered to watch. They were safe behind a clear dome that let them see everything. There were a lot of people on the observation deck, with delegates standing shoulder to shoulder, tentacle to tentacle, or whatever appendages their species used. Holographic screens showed feeds from dozens of tiny drones flying around the simulated jungle. The drones were so small that they could only be seen with the naked eye and could see every angle of the hunt that was about to happen. The Arbiter's voice could be heard clearly in both the observation deck and the simulator itself. The environment settings are set to match the tropical areas of Earth, the old Mythian said. An average example of Deathworld conditions. A few species on the observation deck moved around uncomfortably. The Torgathy delegate nervously ruffled his purple feathers. A crystalline species from the outer rim made a noise like wind chimes in a storm. One of the aquatic delegates even moved back into their water tank. Moderate, someone said quietly. That's moderate? Look at the temperature readings, another delegate said, and their translator made it clear how upset they were. 40 degrees? That would kill most of us in a few hours. And the humidity, said a third voice. How does anything live in that? Velcross was already moving inside the simulator, not knowing or caring about the commentary above. His body, which looked like crystal, started to move. The facets turned and changed their angle to catch and bend the light around him. It was a natural chameleon-like ability that his species had developed over millions of years of ambush hunting. In just a few seconds, he went from a shining light to something that was almost invisible. His body blended in perfectly with the jungle's dappled shadows and green-filtered sunlight. It was great to watch him. Every move was planned, controlled, and purposeful. Without making a sound, his feet found a place to stand on the jungle floor. Instead of pushing through things, his body flowed around them. This was a predator in its element, doing what it was made to do. It didn't seem to matter that this wasn't his real element and that his people came from cold, dry caves instead of hot, wet jungles. A predator was a predator, and Velcross was one of the best. Rebecca, on the other hand, looked almost funny unprepared. She was wearing regular exploration gear and stood in a small clearing where the simulator had put her. Pants that are light and a shirt that wicks away moisture, both in neutral colors. Basic hiking boots that weren't in great shape anymore. She had a small pack on her back that probably held water and other basic things. No guns. No armor. No high-tech stuff. Like a tourist looking up at the canopy above, there is just a person standing in the jungle. She took a deep breath, and even from the observation deck, the delegates could see her chest rise and fall as she worked to pull in the thick, humid air. After that, she looked around, seemed to choose a random direction and started walking. Just walking. Not running. Not hiding. She was just walking through the jungle at a steady pace, pushing leaves aside and stepping over roots like she was on a nature hike. It didn't take long for Velcross to find her trail and start following it. Most of the people who watched thought the first 24 hours would go exactly as they did. Velcross moved through the jungle like a ghost, following Rebecca with the skill of a species that had been hunting for 10 million years. He was patient and careful, saving his strength while getting closer. This wasn't his first hunt, and every move he made showed that. Rebecca, on the other hand, seemed to be making every mistake a person could make. She left broken branches behind her, and small twigs that were broken at chest height pointed like arrows in the direction she had gone. The soft earth left clear prints from her boots as they moved. She even marked trees from time to time by scraping the bark with something sharp, leaving blazes that stood out against the darker wood below. The delegates were already mentally preparing for the end of the hunt on the observation deck. The Torgathy delegate preened his feathers, which had become less scared since the last time they had been scared. "She's making rookie mistakes," he said, and his beak clicked, which could have been disappointment. "Leaving marks all over the place. My baby birds could follow that path." The representative from the Whisper clan stretched out their eye stalks again and looked at the holographic feeds with what looked like interest in their species. They all agreed, "The human seems panicked." The translator had to work hard to understand their wet whispering voice. Going too fast and not thinking clearly. This won't last long. Maybe within the first day cycle. A few other delegates quietly agreed. People were already quietly betting on when Velcross would make his last move. Would it be tonight, when Rebecca had to stop and sleep? When will you be tired tomorrow morning? Most people agreed that she wouldn't last 48 hours, let alone the full 72. Tom Parker wasn't looking at Rebecca's trail of broken branches and disturbed earth in the human section of the observation deck, though. He was looking at the biometric feeds that were floating in front of him. These were the live data coming from the sensors built into Rebecca's gear. And what he saw there wasn't the same as what everyone else saw. Rebecca's breath was steady. Not the short, quick gasps of someone who is scared and running, but the deep, steady breathing of someone who is getting used to a long-distance pace. Her heart rate was higher than normal, but it was steady. About 140 beats per minute, which is high for resting but normal for long periods of aerobic activity. Her core temperature had gone up, but not to a dangerous level. Her body was sweating, which was a good way for it to cool down. And those tracks she was leaving, those obvious signs that everyone was ignoring as panic and lack of experience? Tom brought up the satellite view of her path, which showed her route through the jungle as a red line on a map. It wasn't by chance. It wasn't scared. It was a spiral, a pattern that was getting tighter and tighter as it went around and around in a certain direction. She was taking care of Velcross. Taking him exactly where she wanted him to go. Tom didn't say a word. He just sat back in his chair and waited. It was 1 hour and 30 minutes. The fake sun in the jungle had set and risen again, just like a real day-night cycle. Velcross was still going after him and still sure of himself, but the drones were picking up something new in his biometrics. His body temperature was going up. He had slowed down a little and his movements were less smooth. It was 1:35. Velcross stopped for the first time to rest in the shade of a huge tree. His body's crystalline structure, which was meant to keep him warm in the cold caves of his home world, was working against him here. He was too hot, and the humid air made it hard for him to cool down. Rebecca kept walking at that same steady pace somewhere up ahead in the jungle. At hour 36, the simulator had changed in a big way. Velcross, the beautiful crystal predator who had come into the jungle with such confidence, was having a hard time. Not just tired or out of breath, but really having a hard time going on. The first problem was the heat. It felt like a heavy weight on him, and every move he made felt like he was pushing through thick syrup. Kethvar, the Zenthari homeworld, was nothing like this. At home, the temperature hardly ever went above 15 degrees Celsius. The air was dry like a desert with very little moisture. The caves where his ancestors learned how to hunt were cool and comfortable, and the heat quickly escaped through the crystal walls. In this fake jungle that people thought was normal, the temperature never dropped below 38 degrees even at night. And the humidity was what really did it. Velcross's body was made to slowly release heat so that it could stay warm in cold places. That same design was now against him. His crystal structure kept heat inside, and the wet air made it impossible for anything to cool down. It felt like I was being slowly cooked from the inside out. He had been drinking water all the time from the advanced hydration system that was built into his gear. The Zenthari were smart enough to know how important it was to stay hydrated, and his system could purify and recycle water very well. But it didn't seem like any amount of water was enough. His body was losing moisture faster than he could replace it, which was something his species had never learned how to deal with. The wet heat was pulling water out of him through his breathing, through the tiny gaps between his crystalline plates, and through every surface that was exposed to this horrible place. The edges of his vision were starting to get a little blurry. The parts of his eyes that made them up weren't focusing right anymore. It looked like everything was a little off, like looking through dirty glass. Rebecca, on the other hand, kept going. The drone feeds made it clear who she was, and she looked bad by anyone's standards. Her hair was stuck to her head with sweat. There were dark spots under her arms and down her back where moisture had soaked through her shirt. Her face and arms were covered in dirt. She had taken off her jacket hours ago and tied it around her waist, where it hit her hip with each step. But she kept going at the same steady pace. She mostly walked, but when the ground was good for it she would break into a jog. Sometimes she would run for short bursts before going back to her walking rhythm. And she never stopped for more than a few minutes at a time. She would stop every once in a while to drink water, eat something from her pack, or check where she was going. Then she'd be moving again like a machine that never stops. There were clear streams of sweat running down her face and arms. It was all over her body, and the filtered sunlight that made it through the canopy made it shine. But that was the point. That was exactly what her body was made to do. The mood on the observation deck had changed a lot from how sure everyone was in the first few hours. The delegates weren't joking around or talking about how quickly this would end anymore. They were leaning forward and watching the feeds with more and more confusion and, in some cases, growing horror. A Mathian medical observer, one of the specialists brought in to keep an eye on the health of both participants, reached out with a gelatinous appendage to one of the holographic displays. Her core temperature is high but stable, they said, their voices sounding like they were reading clinical data. 38.7 degrees Celsius. High but still safe for her kind. She's doing a good job of thermoregulating by sweating. The Zenthari observer, who was smaller and less proud than Velcross, made a sound like glass grinding. Impossible, he hissed, his facets flashing with anger. She should have been too tired to do that much work in this heat hours ago. She should be on the floor. Not aware. How is she still moving? Tom Parker leaned forward in his seat. He wasn't nervous anymore, something else had taken its place. Maybe pride. Definitely vindication. He said quietly, but his voice carried across the quiet observation deck. Our species evolved in conditions just like this. We're literally made for it. We are the only animals on Earth that can sweat from almost every part of our bodies. It's not pretty, but it gets the job done. It helps us cool off even when it's very hot and humid. Other animals have to stop, but we can keep going. He pointed to the screen that showed Rebecca's biometrics. Check her heart rate. Steady. Her breath. Under control. She isn't freaking out. She isn't even that stressed out. This is just how people are. We walk. We run. We keep on going. 4 hours. We can do it for days if we have to. A few delegates turned to look at the people in their section with new looks on their faces. Words that might have shown respect. Or it could have been fear. The second full day-night cycle of the simulator came to an end at hour 48. Velcross had come to a stop. His earlier smooth grace was gone, and in its place were stumbles and awkward movements that showed his body was pushed too far. His ability to change colors, which had made him almost invisible, was failing. His crystalline structure was flickering between its natural glittering look and its camouflaged look. His body was using all of its energy to stay alive and keep its basic functions going, so there was no energy left for advanced abilities. He had to stop 3 times in the last hour alone, falling into any shade he could find. The big trees helped block some of the direct sunlight, but not a lot. It was impossible to escape the heat. His crystal structure, which was usually so bright and clear, had lost some of its shine. It now looked cloudy like frosted glass, which was a sign that his health was getting worse. At that point he saw something that made his mind race with pure primal fear. Something that shouldn't have been able to happen. The tracks had gone a different way. For 2 full days, Velcross had been following Rebecca's trail by looking at the broken branches, disturbed soil, and marked trees. The trail had always gone deeper into the jungle, away from him, so he had to follow it. That's how hunts worked. The predator ran after. The prey ran away. But the tracks in front of him weren't going away anymore. They were going back. Toward his place. Rebecca had stopped running. She had turned around and was now walking back along the path she had already taken. She was walking toward him. It was hard for Velcross's tired and dehydrated brain to process this new information. It went against everything he thought he should do. This wasn't done by prey. The prey ran until it couldn't anymore, then it hid, and then it died. The prey didn't turn around and walk calmly back to the predator. No, he whispered, and his voice came out as a soft chime that was hard for him to hear. No, prey doesn't do this. The prey runs. That's what prey does. The tracks, though, were true. New marks on the trees, branches broken at a different angle than before, and footprints that crossed over older ones but went the other way. She was going to come back. Following her own trail at the same steady, unrelenting pace she had kept up for 2 full days. Rebecca Hayes was no longer running. She wasn't trying to hide. She wasn't doing any of the things that prey should do. Velcross couldn't say exactly when she stopped being the prey, but it was within the last 48 hours. She was on the hunt now. And he was the one they were after. Rebecca found Velcross at 53 hours, lying under one of the huge trees that made up the jungle canopy. His clear body lay on the ground in the biggest patch of shade, with his arms and legs spread out in a way that looked like he was giving up. The beautiful, light-catching facets that had made him so beautiful at first were now cloudy and looked more like dirty glass than living diamond. The bioluminescence that had been a sign of health in his species and had glowed inside his crystalline structure had faded to almost nothing. Heat exhaustion and severe dehydration finally brought down the great predator. The hunter had not been caught by claws or teeth, but by simple, unending endurance. Rebecca stood on the edge of the clearing and looked down at him. She had been walking for 53 hours straight, with only short breaks to eat and drink. Her clothes were ruined, branches had ripped them and the sweat had never really dried in the humid air. There was a lot of mud on her boots. Her hair was a mess and hung in strands around her face. She looked like she had been through a lot. But she was still there. Still going. Still going. The rules for the challenge were very clear. The first person to hurt the other person wins. Velcross was lying there, defenseless and barely awake. He couldn't fight back or even protect himself. One hit would be enough. One hit to one of his weak joints, or just waiting a few more hours for the heat to finish what it had started. Rebecca could say she won either way right now. Instead, she reached up and turned on the small device on her collar that connected her to the observation deck above. Not only did the delegates who were watching hear her speak, but the official council records also recorded it. Her voice was steady and clear, and it didn't show any signs of the exhaustion her body must have been feeling after 53 hours of non-stop movement in the heat. Ambassador Velcross called us prey, she said, and everyone on the observation deck stopped talking. In a way he was right. But he got something very wrong about what that means. She walked slowly to the fallen Zenthri and knelt down next to him. She moved slowly and carefully, showing no signs of aggression. She took out a hydration pack from her small bag. It was one of the emergency supplies she had been carrying. It was made for very bad situations and was full of minerals and electrolytes that would help someone recover from severe dehydration. She also took out some small packets of supplements that would help his body chemistry stay stable. Rebecca's voice was heard on every screen and translator on the observation deck. Apex predators have a luxury, Ambassador, she said. When the hunt gets too hard, like when the prey is too fast or the weather is too bad, they can stop. They can leave. They can take a break for a day or a week and try again later. Predators evolved so that they could stop. A lion on Earth doesn't die if it doesn't catch a gazelle. It just keeps trying until it gets it right. She put the hydration pack close to Velcross's mouth and helped him tilt his head so he could drink. As the liquid entered his body, his facets slowly began to brighten. The clouded look cleared up a little as his body desperately absorbed the minerals and moisture it needed. The change was small but clear, like seeing a plant that was dying come back to life after being watered. Prey species don't have that choice, Rebecca said. There was something in her voice that was hard and old, like it had been around for millions of years. We couldn't stop. We couldn't get any sleep. We couldn't just say, this is too hard, and try again tomorrow. Earth tried to kill us for millions of years. Heat waves that turned whole areas into stoves. Ice ages that covered continents with glaciers. Droughts that made all the water sources dry up. Floods that killed entire ecosystems. Predators that were bigger, faster, and stronger than we were. Sicknesses that killed thousands. And each other, because people have always been their own worst enemy. Slowly, she stood up and turned to face the observation dome. She couldn't see the delegates very well from inside the simulator, but she knew they were watching. She looked right at the cameras and said, "We didn't become strong because we were predators, Ambassador. We couldn't be stopped because we were prey that wouldn't die." You could hear a pin drop on the observation deck. Just a few days ago, species that had called humans weak were now staring at their screens in shock. Rebecca kept talking and her voice got stronger. We evolved to chase animals that could run faster than us because we could chase them for hours until they were too tired to keep going. We learned to sweat from almost every part of our body so that we could keep going when other animals had to stop and catch their breath. We learned how to control our core temperature in a range that would kill most living things in this room. We can live in deserts where the temperature gets up to 50 degrees. At -40 we can live in the Arctic. And we can keep going through it all. She reached out her hand to Velcross, clearly trying to help, not hurt. The Zenthri took it after a long time, wrapping his crystal fingers around her smaller human hand. Rebecca pulled on him, which helped him move so that he was sitting up against the tree trunk, still in the shade but no longer lying on the ground. Rebecca said, "Your species became apex predators through strength and ambush tactics." Her tone wasn't mean, she was just stating facts. That gave you power. That made you the most powerful person in your world. But it also made you an expert, Ambassador. Just right for the cold, dry caves where you evolved. But weak everywhere else. My kind? We are generalists. We had to be. Earth didn't let us specialize. We hunt for endurance. Predators who chased after prey and never forgot what that meant. Rebecca and Velcross were back in front of the Galactic Council 6 hours later. At hour 60, the simulator was turned off because it was clear that Velcross could not go on. The medical team had taken both of them out, treated Velcross for severe heat exhaustion, and given Rebecca a clean bill of health even though she had been active for almost 60 hours straight. There were a lot of people in the council chamber. People from all over the station had heard what happened in the simulator and had come to see what happened next. The mood was very different from the one 3 days ago. Then people were doubtful and dismissive. Now there was something else going on. Maybe respect. Or maybe fear. The first person to speak was Velcross. His voice was quiet but clear, and the chamber systems made it loud enough for everyone to hear. His crystal structure had regained some of its former brilliance, but he still looked dimmer than before. I withdraw my objection to the human petition, he said in a formal tone. I said that Deathworlders were easy targets. Commander Hayes showed me a truth that I didn't understand, a truth that my kind may have forgotten in the millions of years we've been in charge. Yes, predatory evolution gives power, but it also limits it. In our element, the Zenthari are the best. We are the best in the cold caves of Kethvar. But humans? He stopped and his features changed in a way that made it look like he was thinking hard. People changed to stay alive in all places. They didn't rule their world by being strong. They lasted longer because they were strong. And that has made all the difference. The council chamber was completely quiet as Velcross turned to look directly at Rebecca. I see humans as equals, he said, and the heaviness of those words seemed to fill the whole room. More than equal. I call them what they really are, the prey that became predators not because they were strong, fast, or had natural weapons, but because they refused to stop. Through the will to keep going even when it seems impossible. Everyone voted the same way after that. All of the species, even those who had been against it before, voted to approve humanity's request to expand into Deathworld territories. As the session came to an end and delegates started to leave, still talking quietly about what they had seen, Tom walked up to Rebecca with a medical scanner in his hand. His face showed both worry and respect. Ma'am, you really need to get some sleep now. 59 hours, Rebecca said with a small smile, finishing his sentence. Yes, she looked tired but not worn out. Not broken. Just someone who had worked hard and was ready for it to be over. That's not much, Tom. The longest a person has ever hunted for 8 days. 8 whole days. Our ancestors would chase animals across the African savannas in the sun for hours and hours until the animal literally fell over from exhaustion. Some hunts went more than 100 kilometers. She turned around and looked at the observation dome, where different kinds of animals were still watching her with new eyes. We didn't make it through our death world by being easy targets. We stayed alive by making sure that anything that tried to kill us would regret it. The weather. The hunters. The illnesses. Even our own world eventually learned that lesson. You can't outlast a person. We just keep going. Rebecca stopped at the door to the chamber and looked back at the council floor one last time, where all of this had started. Where Velcross had said that humans were weak, soft, and lucky. They had treated her like prey. They wanted to know what a Deathworlder can do, she said softly. They know now. We last. That's what we do. We last.